At this point, every campaign across the country is reviewing what happened yesterday to see if there's something that can be taken away from the numbers and applied to what will be happening in the fall. Joining us now to add more perspective to yesterday's elections is CQ Weekly Managing Editor David Hawkings. He joins us tonight from Washington. David, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be with you again.
So break it down for us. Yesterday there were some surprising results and then some not so surprising results. There was the Rand Paul win, which of course the Tea Partiers are declaring victory over. Is that in fact the case, a big win for Tea Party or not?
Oh, it was the biggest win yet for the Tea Party movement. Rand Paul was clearly a product of the Tea Party movement, was recruited by the Tea Party movement. Last fall, the big bellwether race in your part of the country in upstate New York, the Tea Party movement was sort of late to the party, as it were, in staking its claim in that one. They didn't actually recruit the independent candidate that had been denied the Republican nomination. They sort of signed on with him later in the game and were obviously very influential. But in the Rand Paul case, Rand Paul was a Tea Party favorite from the start. He's, of course, the son of Ron Paul, the congressman from Houston, who is considered sort of the founding father of the Tea Party movement. In the end, this was not a surprise. It seemed as though Rand Paul would win in the closing days, but it is a huge kick in the teeth to the Republican establishment. Let's remember that Rand Paul's opponent, Grayson, the Secretary of State in Kentucky, was handpicked by Mitch McConnell, who, in addition to being Kentucky senior senator, is the Senate Republican leader, and the highest ranking elected Republican right now in the whole country.
What is it going to take really for the Republican establishment to get the message? You referenced New York 23, and while it's true that the Tea Party was late to that party, they did manage to push out the quote-unquote establishment candidate, if you will, Assemblywoman Didi Scazafava, for being too moderate.
Right.
You're seeing something of a repeat in that here. I'm not really so certain why the National Republican Party hasn't managed to get on board yet.
Well, one of the oldest sort of adages in politics and the political dynamics is that you have to have a candidate who can appeal to the base of your party in the primary, either the left edge of the party if you're a Democrat or the right edge of your party if you're a Republican, but who can then come in for the general election and start in the summer and fall winning over the swing voters who really make up the difference in most elections. And there's very little evidence that the Tea Party candidates either want to or would be able to win over those centrists. They seem to be putting ideological purity far ahead of political practicality.
So then Paul would actually be a good target for the Democrats come the general election in November.
That's true. Kentucky has been a Republican state, pretty solidly Republican state in recent years, although the last time this particular Senate seat was opened 6 years ago when the incumbent Senator Jim Bunning, the Republican, came very close to losing to a Democrat, and that Democrat, the Lieutenant Governor, actually lost last night to the Attorney General of Kentucky, who is a mainstream centrist, serious candidate, and who will presumably try to do just what I described, an appeal not only to the Democratic base, but to the center, and to portray Rand Paul as out of touch, an extremist, somebody whose concerns, whose outsider Washington concerns are also met with some pretty outside the mainstream political views. Things like, you know, doing away with the Americans with Disabilities Act and other things that would suggest that he's not in tune with the mainstream of American political thinking right now.
Let's move now to Pennsylvania, an interesting race in particular for me because Arlen Specter is a party flipper, and we have one of those in New York running for governor, the Suffolk County executive Steve Levy. So some now in New York are trying to push this as a proof that party flipping doesn't pay. And actually Sestak, who is the congressman who beat Specter, was actually very adept in the final closing days or final week in painting him as a flipper and an opportunist. Do you think that kind of message would work?
Well, I don't know what's going on very well in the New York governor's race that you described, but Arlen Specter was a victim of his own candor in the end, because when he switched parties a year ago, he said in as many words, "I'm doing this to increase my chances of getting reelected." and that gave Joe Sestak, the eventual winner in the primary yesterday, sort of a golden opportunity to put up a very effective TV ad that said he's more concerned about saving his own job than about bringing more jobs to Pennsylvania, and is an opportunist, and this is exactly what, in this anti-incumbent year, the voters don't want, which is somebody who's so tied to Washington, so much of an insider, that he'll, quote unquote, say or do anything just to save his own job.
How much do you think of that race is going to, it turns out in the long term to bode badly for the president, who actually backed Arlen Specter when he came over to the other side, if you will?
Well, this is going to be, historically, if the historic trends mean anything, and they almost certainly will, this will be a bad year for the president and the president's party in the midterm. The midterm election, you know, in one sentence, is, since the president himself is not on the ballot, it's the one time that races for Congress are held in the 2 years between the presidential elections when the president himself is not on the ballot. So people have an opportunity to express themselves and whether they approve or disapprove of the president by casting their vote for Congress accordingly. And generally, the president is not nearly so popular historically, and in this case, as he was 2 years ago. The president won the general election with 54% of the vote. His approval ratings are not at that level anymore. So it's going to be probably a not so good night for the Democrats and the president's party in November. The president, however, seemed to do this sort of approach avoidance thing with Arlen Specter, where, yes, he gave a speech that embraced Arlen Specter, but he didn't go in personally in the last few days. He didn't throw in quite as much effort and money as some people thought he would. It seemed as though Specter himself probably didn't want him to. They were playing very much an approach avoidance game there at the end.
So, but right, and Pennsylvania is a key